They called me the black sheep of the Martinez family, pulling up to our annual reunion in my beat-up 2015 Honda Civic while my relatives strutted around in their luxury SUVs and sports cars. At the lakeside resort, surrounded by cousins who measured success by horsepower and chrome, I endured their snickering comments about my college car and pitying glances at my simple sundress. When my brother Adrian smirked and loudly asked if I was still driving that rust bucket, their laughter cut through me like broken glass. But as they mocked my modest lifestyle, I calmly waited for the valet to return with something that would silence their arrogance forever. The keys to the $4.2 million lakefront mansion that Adrian had been obsessing over for years, not knowing his failure sister owned it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Sophia Martinez, and I should probably start by explaining I've never been the type of person who needs to announce her presence. At 31, I've learned that sometimes the most powerful move is to let others underestimate you completely. That Saturday afternoon in July, as I drove my faithful Honda up the winding mountain road to Clearwater Resort, I reminded myself of exactly that philosophy. The invitation had arrived 6 weeks earlier, printed on expensive cardstock that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. Martinez Family Annual Reunion, it declared in elegant gold script. A weekend of celebration at Clearwater Resort. I hadn't attended one of these gatherings in 3 years, not since the last time I endured an entire weekend of subtle jabs about my alternative lifestyle choices and well-meaning advice about getting my life together. But this year felt different. This year, I had reasons to show up that went far beyond family obligation. Clearwater Resort sprawled across 200 acres of pristine lakefront property in the Cascade Mountains, the kind of place where tech executives and old money families came to see and be seen. As I approached the main lodge, I could see the parking area was already filled with vehicles that cost more than most people's annual salaries. BMW X7s, Mercedes G-Wagons, a gleaming Tesla Model S, and what looked like Adrian's new Porsche Cayenne, metallic silver and probably fresh off the lot. I pulled my Honda into a space between a Range Rover and an Audi Q8. The contrast almost comical. My car looked like it had wandered into the wrong zip code, its faded blue paint and small ding on the passenger door telling a story of practicality over prestige. But I'd kept driving it for reasons my family would never understand. Reasons that had everything to do with strategy and nothing to do with inability to afford something better. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the lodge, I could see familiar figures moving around in the main reception area. Uncle Frank was holding court near the stone fireplace, probably regaling anyone who'd listen with stories of his latest real estate acquisitions. Aunt Diana clutched a martini glass while gesturing dramatically, her jewelry catching the afternoon light. The cousins clustered in their usual formation, Kyle with his tech startup swagger, Vanessa showing off what looked like a new designer handbag, and several others I recognized but rarely spoke to anymore. And there was Adrian, my older brother by 3 years, standing near the reception desk in a perfectly tailored linen shirt and designer jeans that probably cost more than my monthly rent used to be, back when I was renting. His dark hair was styled with the kind of casual precision that required expensive products and regular salon visits. He was gesturing animatedly to someone I couldn't see, probably describing his latest business triumph or expensive purchase. I sat in my car for a moment, gathering my thoughts and checking my reflection in the rearview mirror. Simple makeup, hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, wearing a modest sundress I'd bought on sale last year. By Martinez family standards, I looked like I was dressed for a casual lunch rather than a luxury resort weekend. This was intentional. The valet approached my window with a polite but slightly confused smile. He was young, probably college-aged, working the summer season at the resort. "Good afternoon, miss. Are you checking in?" "Just here for the Martinez family reunion," I said, handing him my keys. I'll need these back in about an hour. He glanced at my Honda and then at the sea of luxury vehicles surrounding us. Of course, miss. I'll take good care of it. I almost smiled at his diplomatic tone. He probably parked thousands of cars worth more than my annual salary, but he treated my modest vehicle with the same professional courtesy. Walking through the lodge's entrance, I was immediately struck by the soaring ceilings and rustic elegance that screamed expensive taste. Leather furniture arranged around stone fire pits, local artwork that probably cost more than most people's cars, and views of the lake that were worth millions all by themselves. The Martinez family had certainly chosen their venue well. It was the perfect backdrop for a weekend of competitive displaying of wealth and success. Sophia! The voice belonged to my mother, Carmen, who approached with the kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She was impeccably dressed as always, her silver hair styled perfectly despite the mountain air, wearing a casual outfit that probably cost more than my car payment. "You made it! We weren't sure you'd come." "Wouldn't miss it," I replied, accepting her air kiss that didn't actually make contact with my cheek. "The resort is beautiful." "Isn't it?" Frank found it through one of his business contacts. Cost a fortune to book the entire lodge for the weekend, but you know how these things are. She paused, her eyes scanning my simple dress. "You look comfortable." It was vintage Carmen Martinez, the ability to make comfortable sound like a gentle insult wrapped in motherly concern. "Sophia Martinez!" Uncle Frank's booming voice carried across the reception area as he spotted me. "Look who decided to grace us with her presence." I walked over to where he was standing with Aunt Diana and several cousins, steeling myself for the inevitable interrogation. Frank Romano had married into the Martinez family 25 years ago, but had seamlessly adopted our family's tradition of measuring worth through material possessions and professional achievements. He owned a successful construction company and never let anyone forget it. "Frank, Diana," I said, offering polite smiles. "Thank you for organizing this. The location is incredible." "Only the best for family," Frank replied, though his eyes were already scanning me with the practiced assessment of someone cataloging net worth through appearance. "How are things going for you these days? Still working in, what was it again?" "Consulting," I said simply, which was technically true, though dramatically understated. "Ah, yes, consulting," Diana's tone suggested. She found this as vague and unsatisfying as I'd intended. "That must be flexible work?" Before I could respond, Adrian appeared at my elbow, and I could immediately sense the energy shift in our small group. My brother had always commanded attention effortlessly, the kind of natural charisma that made people lean in when he spoke. "Little sister," he said, pulling me into a hug that felt genuine despite everything. "I was starting to think you'd gotten lost on those mountain roads." "Just taking my time," I replied. "Traffic wasn't too bad." "Traffic?" Kyle chimed in from nearby. "Or was your car struggling with the elevation?" The comment drew chuckles from the cousins, and I felt the familiar sting of being the family punchline. "The Honda handles mountains just fine," I said evenly. "The Honda," Adrian repeated, with a grin that wasn't entirely kind, but wasn't entirely kind either. "God, Sophia, are you still driving that thing? What is it now, like 8 years old?" "9," I corrected. "But it runs perfectly." "I'm sure it does," Vanessa said with the tone people use when talking to children about their imaginary friends. "There's something to be said for reliability over style." The conversation was heading exactly where I had expected it to go, and I found myself settling into the familiar role of family disappointment with practiced ease. Let them think they knew my story. Let them assume my modest car meant modest means. In an hour, their assumptions would be shattered in a way none of them saw coming. "You know," Adrian continued, warming to his theme, "I keep telling you, if you need help with a down payment on something decent, family takes care of family. I mean, showing up to a place like this in a Civic," he gestured around the elegant lodge, "it just doesn't fit the image." "What image?" I asked quietly. "The Martinez image," Frank interjected with authority. "When people see us together, they make assumptions about our family's success. We all represent each other." I nodded, as if considering this profound observation, while inside I felt the familiar mixture of hurt and determination that had fueled me for the past several years. They had no idea what I'd built while they'd been focused on appearances. They couldn't imagine that someone who drove a 9-year-old Honda might have chosen to do so for reasons that had nothing to do with financial limitations. Speaking of image, Adrian said, his voice taking on the excited tone he got when discussing his favorite topics. Did you guys see the new property listing that went live this week? The Blackstone estate up on Ridgepoint? My God, it's everything I've ever wanted in a house. My pulse quickened, but I kept my expression neutral. 4.2 million, he continued, pulling out his phone to show photos to the gathered family members. 6,000 square feet, private lake access, infinity pool, wine cellar. The master suite alone is bigger than most apartments. It's gorgeous, Diana cooed, scrolling through the photos. Though, wasn't it just listed? Aren't you concerned someone might snatch it up? Adrian's confidence faltered slightly. Well, I'm working on financing. A property like that requires some strategic planning, but my broker thinks we can make it work. I watched him swipe through photos of rooms I knew intimately, describing features I'd studied in person just last week. The irony was almost overwhelming. 4.2 million? Kyle whistled. That's serious money, even for this family. Investment money, Adrian corrected. Properties like that only appreciate. In 5 years, it'll be worth $6 million easy. As he continued describing his dream house, my house, I checked my watch. 45 minutes until the valet returned with what would change everything. 45 minutes of letting them assume I was still the family failure who couldn't afford better than a 9-year-old Honda. I could be patient for 45 more minutes. After all, I'd been patient for 3 years while building something none of them could have imagined. What was 45 more minutes of being underestimated? The best part was that Adrian had no idea he was describing his fantasy home to the person who already held the deed. The next 45 minutes passed like a carefully orchestrated performance, where I played the role I'd been cast in years ago, the family member who'd never quite lived up to expectations. I listened to Uncle Frank describe his latest commercial development project, nodding appropriately as he explained concepts I probably understood better than he did. I smiled politely while Vanessa showed off photos of her recent European vacation, each image a calculated display of luxury and leisure. Adrian continued holding court near the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the lake, regaling anyone who'd listen with his plans for the Blackstone estate. He'd pulled up the listing on his tablet now, giving everyone a virtual tour of what he called the property that would change everything. The wine cellar alone could hold 300 bottles, he was saying to Kyle and 2 cousins I barely knew. And the master bathroom has a soaking tub carved from a single piece of Italian marble. Can you imagine coming home to that every day? I could imagine it quite well, actually, since I'd been doing exactly that for the past 8 months. The asking price seems steep, though, Kyle observed, ever the practical entrepreneur. 4.2 million is serious money, even in this market. It's not about the price, Adrian replied with the confidence of someone who'd clearly been practicing the speech. It's about the investment potential. Properties on Ridgepoint don't come available often. The last comparable sale was 6 months ago for 5.8 million. He was right about that. I'd done my research thoroughly before making the purchase. Plus, he continued, warming to his favorite subject, the location is everything. Private road, gated entrance, only 4 houses on the entire ridge. You're not just buying a house, you're buying exclusivity. Mom approached our group with fresh drinks, her eyes bright with the kind of maternal pride that came from seeing her successful son discuss million-dollar real estate. Adrian's always had such good taste in properties, she announced to no one in particular. Ever since he was little, he could spot quality. It runs in the family, Aunt Diana added, though her glance in my direction suggested she thought I might be the exception to that rule. I checked my watch. 15 minutes until the valet returned. The anticipation was becoming almost unbearable, but I'd learned over the years that timing was everything. Too early and the impact would be diminished. Too late and the moment would lose its power. Sophia, my father Roberto called from across the room. I walked over to where he was sitting with Uncle Frank and another man I didn't recognize. Dad had been quieter than usual today, observing more than participating in the family's ritualistic displaying of success. I want you to meet Jim Brewster. He's the resort manager here at Clearwater. Jim stood and extended his hand with the practiced warmth of someone in the hospitality industry. He was probably in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and the kind of confident bearing that came from managing luxury properties. Ms. Martinez, pleasure to meet you. Your family has been wonderful guests. Thank you, I replied. The resort is absolutely beautiful. You must have an interesting clientele here. We do, Jim agreed. A lot of tech executives, real estate developers, successful entrepreneurs. People who appreciate privacy and quality service. He paused, studying me with curiosity. Your father mentioned you work in consulting. What type of consulting, if you don't mind me asking? Real estate development and investment consulting, I said simply. Frank's eyebrows shot up. Real estate? I didn't know you'd gotten into real estate. There's a lot you don't know about what I do, I replied mildly. Before Frank could respond, I heard the distinctive sound of expensive shoes on the lodge's polished stone floors. The valet, I remembered his name was Marcus, was approaching our group with a professional smile and something in his hand that made my pulse quicken. Excuse me, he said politely. I'm looking for a Ms. Sophia Martinez. The conversation in our immediate area quieted as people turned to see what the valet wanted. I could see Adrian in the background, still showing off his tablet to anyone who'd look at the Blackstone estate photos. That's me, I said, stepping forward. Marcus held out a set of keys, but not the simple Honda key I'd given him an hour ago. These were different keys, heavier, more substantial, attached to a distinctive keychain that would be immediately recognizable to anyone who'd been paying attention to luxury real estate listings. The property manager asked me to return these to you, Marcus said, in a clear voice that carried across the now silent reception area. He said to tell you that the security system walkthrough is scheduled for tomorrow morning at 9, and the new furniture delivery should arrive by noon. Also, the landscaping crew finished the infinity pool maintenance this afternoon. I took the keys, feeling their familiar weight in my palm. The Blackstone keychain caught the light from the lodge's chandelier, its distinctive logo clearly visible to everyone who was now staring at our interaction. Thank you, Marcus, I said calmly. And please tell David that I'll be there tomorrow morning to handle the walkthrough personally. The silence that followed was profound. I could hear the lodge's background music, the distant sound of boats on the lake, even the whisper of air conditioning. What I couldn't hear was a single voice from my family members, who were all staring at the keys in my hand with expressions ranging from confusion to dawning realization. Adrian was the first to find his voice, though it came out strangled and uncertain. Sophia, those keys. I looked down at them as if noticing them for the first time. Oh, these? Yes, they're for the Blackstone estate. I paused, letting that sink in. You know that $4.2 million property you've been describing, the one with the Italian marble bathroom and the 300-bottle wine cellar? The color drained from Adrian's face. That's not possible. The infinity pool really is spectacular. Though I have to say, your description of the master suite was quite accurate. It is bigger than most apartments. Kyle's mouth was hanging open slightly. You bought the Blackstone estate? 8 months ago. Though I've been considering it for over a year. You're right about the investment potential, Adrian. Properties on Ridgepoint are incredibly rare. Uncle Frank looked like he was trying to solve a complex math problem in his head. Sophia, that property costs $4.2 million. Plus closing costs, inspection fees, and immediate renovations. All cash purchase, no financing necessary. The statement hung in the air like a physical presence. I could see the wheels turning behind their eyes as they tried to reconcile the woman they thought they knew, the one who drove a 9-year-old Honda and wore sale rack dresses, with someone who could casually purchase a multi-million-dollar estate. Aunt Diana was the first to attempt damage control, her voice taking on the artificially bright tone she used when reality wasn't cooperating with her preferred narrative. Well, that's wonderful, dear. Though I have to ask, how exactly does someone in consulting afford... She let the question trail off, but the implication was clear. There must be some explanation that would allow them to maintain their worldview, where I remain the family's underachiever. Real estate development and investment consulting can be quite lucrative when you know what you're doing, I said mildly. Mom had found her voice, though it sounded weak and uncertain. Sophia, why didn't you tell us you were doing so well? We had no idea. I replied simply, when was the last time any of you inquired about my work beyond dismissive comments about consulting? When did anyone show genuine interest in what I was building? The question created another uncomfortable silence. I could see them mentally reviewing years of family interactions, probably realizing that their interest in my life had never extended much beyond polite small talk and subtle suggestions that I needed to get my act together. Adrian was staring at the keys in my hand as if they were alien artifacts. You actually own my dream house? He said quietly, more to himself than to me. I own a house that happens to match your taste, though I have to say your research was excellent. The property really is everything you described. Jim Brewster cleared his throat, breaking the tension with professional smoothness. Ms. Martinez, I didn't realize you were the new owner of the Blackstone estate. That's quite a property. David Kim mentioned the sale to a private investor, but he didn't share details, of course. David's been excellent to work with, very professional, very discreet. David Kim? Frank asked, his business instincts finally kicking in. You mean David Kim from Pacific Northwest Property Development? He's one of the most exclusive agents in the region. The same, I confirmed. He specializes in high-end properties for private investors who prefer to keep their transactions confidential. I could see Frank's mind racing, trying to calculate what kind of wealth would be required not just to purchase such a property, but to work with David Kim's level of representation. The family continued staring at me as if I'd suddenly sprouted wings. Their entire understanding of family dynamics had just been shattered by a simple set of keys and a valet's professional message. Adrian finally managed to speak again, his voice hollow. 8 months. You've owned it for 8 months. The closing was in November. I've been taking my time with renovations and decorating. You know how it is with properties of that caliber. Everything has to be perfect. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now casually discussing multi-million-dollar home ownership with people who, an hour ago, had been mocking my choice in automobiles. As the reality of the situation continued to sink in, I could see the calculations beginning behind their eyes. If the family failure could afford a $4.2 million house, what else had they gotten wrong about Sophia Martinez? What else didn't they know about the quiet woman who drove a Honda and wore discount dresses? The answers to those questions would come in time, but for now, I was content to watch them grapple with their shattered assumptions while I held the keys to their new understanding of exactly who I'd become. But to understand how I got to that moment, standing in a luxury resort holding keys to a multi-million-dollar estate while my family stared in disbelief, I need to take you back 3.5 years to a gray Tuesday morning in February when my life fell apart completely. I'd been working as a senior marketing analyst for Meridian Financial Services, a mid-size investment firm in downtown Seattle. It wasn't my dream job, but it paid well enough to cover my one-bedroom apartment, student loans, and the lifestyle I thought I was supposed to want. I was good at what I did, too, analyzing market trends, creating presentation materials for client meetings, and helping the firm's advisors understand how to reach different demographic segments. That Tuesday started like any other. I arrived at the office at 7:30, grabbed coffee from the break room, and settled at my desk to review the quarterly performance reports that were due by noon. The office had that quiet, focused energy of people getting work done before the chaos of meetings and phone calls took over the day. At 9:15, my manager, Rachel Webb, knocked on my cubicle wall. "Sophia, can you come to conference room B when you have a minute?"
Something in her tone made me look up from my computer. Rachel was usually direct and business-focused, but there was an uncomfortable softness in her voice that immediately put me on alert. Of course, I said, saving my work and following her down the hallway. Conference room B was where they held termination meetings. I had seen colleagues disappear into that room over the years, emerging 15 minutes later with cardboard boxes and shell-shocked expressions. But it had never occurred to me that I might be next. Rachel wasn't alone. Tom Martinez from HR was there with a folder and the kind of serious expression that meant bad news was coming. The irony of sharing my last name with someone about to fire me wasn't lost on me, even in that moment. Sophia, please sit down. And I knew immediately what was happening. We're restructuring, Tom began, consulting his folder like it contained some kind of script. The company is moving in a different direction, focusing more on automated analytics and digital marketing platforms. Unfortunately, that means eliminating several positions, including yours. The words hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd been expecting them since the moment Rachel had used that particular tone of voice. I see, I managed to say. This isn't about your performance, Rachel added quickly. Your work has always been excellent. It's purely a business decision based on changing market needs. Tom slid a packet across the table. You'll receive 8 weeks of severance pay, Cobra health insurance information, and of course, we'll provide positive references for your job search. 8 weeks. I did the math automatically. Enough to cover rent and basic expenses for 2 months, maybe 3 if I was extremely careful. In a job market where finding comparable work could take 6 months or more. When is my last day? I asked, proud that my voice remained steady. Today, Tom said. We'll need you to gather your personal items and surrender your access cards and laptop. Security will escort you out, but that's just standard procedure, nothing personal. 20 minutes later, I was standing on the sidewalk outside Meridian Financial Services with a cardboard box containing 3 years of accumulated desk items. A coffee mug, a small plant, some personal photos, and a few folders of projects I'd been particularly proud of. The Seattle drizzle was starting, the kind of persistent mist that soaked through clothes slowly but thoroughly. I sat in my Honda in the parking garage for nearly an hour, staring at the concrete wall and trying to process what had just happened. At 28 years old, I thought I was building something resembling a career. I believed that working hard and doing good work would provide some kind of security. The drive back to my apartment in Capitol Hill gave me time to start calculating. Rent was $1,800 a month. Student loans were $400. Car insurance, utilities, groceries, gas. The numbers added up to a reality that was going to run out of money before I ran out of month, probably within 60 days. That evening, I called my parents to break the news. Mom answered on the third ring, her voice bright with the assumption that I was calling with good news or just to chat. Sophia, what a nice surprise. How are things going? Actually, Mom, I lost my job today. The company restructured and eliminated my position. The pause that followed was long enough for me to hear the calculation happening in her head. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. But you're smart and talented. I'm sure you'll find something even better quickly. It was the response I'd expected. Optimistic and well-meaning, but not particularly helpful. Dad got on the phone a moment later. His approach more practical, but equally limited. Do you need money? He asked directly. We could help with a month's rent if that would give you breathing room to find something. I appreciated the offer, but accepting financial help from my family would mean admitting failure in a way that I wasn't ready to do. I'll be fine, I told him. I have some savings, and the severance should cover me while I job hunt. Both statements were lies. My savings account had maybe $1,200, and 8 weeks of severance pay wasn't going to cover 3 months of Seattle rent. For the next 6 weeks, I applied to everything that seemed remotely related to my skills and experience. Marketing analyst positions, research roles, even administrative jobs at companies I'd never heard of. I customized cover letters, updated my LinkedIn profile obsessively, and networked until I ran out of professional contacts to reach out to. The responses were universally polite and universally discouraging. Thank you for your interest, but we've decided to move forward with other candidates. While your background is impressive, we're looking for someone with more specific experience in. We'll keep your resume on file for future opportunities. By week 7 of unemployment, I was down to my last $400 and facing the reality that I was about to become another Seattle eviction statistic. I'd started looking at studio apartments in less desirable neighborhoods, calculating whether I could survive on part-time retail work while continuing to job hunt. That's when I saw the Craigslist ad that changed everything. Administrative assistant needed for small real estate office. Immediate start, flexible hours, growth opportunities for the right person. Experience preferred but not required for motivated candidate. It wasn't glamorous, and the salary was probably half what I'd been making at Meridian, but it was immediate income. I called the number listed and spoke to a man named Theodore Kim, whose voice was warm but businesslike. "Can you start Monday?" he asked after a brief phone interview where I tried to sound enthusiastic about filing and answering phones. "Absolutely," I said. "Good. The address is 1247 Pine Street, second floor, 9 a.m. sharp." That Friday, I wrote a check for my final month's rent, knowing it would overdraw my account, but hoping Ted Kim's office would pay me quickly enough to cover the bounce check fees. Monday morning, I climbed a narrow staircase above the Vietnamese restaurant and found myself in a small office that smelled like pho and old carpet. The space was cramped but organized, with 2 desks, filing cabinets that had seen better days, and windows that looked out onto Pine Street's mix of coffee shops and small businesses. Ted Kim was not what I'd expected. He was probably in his early 50s, wearing jeans and a button-down shirt, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and the kind of calm confidence that suggested he'd seen everything the business world could throw at him. "Sophia Martinez," he said, standing up from his desk with a smile. "Welcome to Kim Property Solutions. Coffee?" The coffee was terrible, but it was free and caffeinated, which made it perfect for my current financial situation. "So," Ted said, settling back behind his desk, "tell me why someone with a marketing background from a financial services firm wants to answer phones for a small real estate office." I could have given him the diplomatic answer about seeking new challenges and being interested in real estate. Instead, I decided on honesty. "Because I got laid off 7 weeks ago, I'm 3 days away from being evicted, and you're the only person who called me back about a job." Ted laughed, which was not the reaction I'd expected. "I appreciate the honesty. Most people try to convince me this is their dream opportunity. It might become one, but right now it's my survival opportunity." "Fair enough," he said. "Here's the thing, Sophia. I don't actually need someone to just answer phones and file papers. What I need is someone smart who can learn this business and help me grow it. The question is whether you're interested in actually learning real estate or whether you're just looking for a paycheck while you hunt for another marketing job." I thought about it for approximately 3 seconds. What would learning a business look like? It would look like starting with administrative work so you understand how everything flows, then learning about property valuation, market analysis, client relations, negotiation strategies, and eventually, if you're good at it and interested, moving into actual deal making. And the pay? Starts low, grows based on performance and results. But Sophia, if you're good at this and you stick with it, you could be making more money in 3 years than you ever made in corporate marketing. I looked around the small office with its outdated furniture and lingering restaurant smells, then thought about my empty bank account and the eviction notice I was probably going to find when I got home. "When do I start learning?" Ted smiled. "Right now. Let me show you how to read a property listing, and then we'll talk about what makes some real estate worth buying and other real estate worth avoiding." That conversation was the beginning of everything that led to me standing in a resort 3.5 years later, holding keys to a $4 million estate while my family tried to reconcile their assumptions with reality. But first, I had to learn that real estate wasn't just about properties. It was about understanding people, markets, timing, and the kind of patient, strategic thinking that could turn a desperate job search into the foundation of real wealth. Ted Kim was about to teach me all of that, starting with the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the best opportunities come disguised as last resorts.
Ted Kim's education in real estate began immediately, and it was unlike anything I had experienced in my corporate career. Instead of theoretical frameworks and PowerPoint presentations, he threw me directly into the deep end of actual deals, actual properties, and actual problems that needed solving. Forget everything you think you know about real estate, he said on my second day, spreading 3 property listings across his desk. Most people think it's about finding pretty houses and matching them with buyers. That's not real estate. That's retail. Real estate is about understanding value, timing, and human psychology. He pointed to the first listing, a modest 2-bedroom house in Valet listed at $450,000. What do you see? I studied the photos and description. A small house that seems overpriced for the neighborhood. Look deeper. What's the lot size? I checked the details. 7,000 square feet. And what's the zoning? I had no idea what that meant, so Ted pulled up the city zoning maps on his computer. Single-family residential. But look at this. He pointed to the surrounding blocks. Everything within 3 blocks is being rezoned for mixed-use development. That lot isn't worth $450,000 as a house. It's worth $650,000 as a development opportunity. Over the next hour, he walked me through similar analyses of the other properties. A condo that seemed reasonably priced until you factored in upcoming special assessments for building repairs. A beautiful Victorian that was a money pit due to foundation issues that wouldn't be apparent until after purchase. Real estate analysis is detective work, Ted explained. The listing tells you what the seller wants you to know. Your job is to figure out what they're not telling you, and more importantly, what they don't know themselves. By week 3, I was accompanying Ted to property viewings, carrying a folder and trying to look professional while frantically taking notes about everything he observed. He had an uncanny ability to spot problems and opportunities that were invisible to me. See how the kitchen tiles are newer than the rest of the flooring? He'd whisper as we walked through a house. That suggests water damage that was cosmetically repaired. Look for signs of moisture in the basement. Or, notice how all the landscaping is freshly planted? Either they're staging for sale or they're covering up drainage problems. Check the property history for flood insurance claims. I started bringing a notebook everywhere, filling it with Ted's observations and insights, foundation cracks that indicated settling versus structural damage, neighborhood improvement signs that suggested property values are rising, market indicators that revealed when sellers were motivated versus just testing the waters. The breakthrough came during my second month when Ted handed me a property listing and said, I want you to do a complete analysis on this. Pretend I'm a client asking whether I should buy it. The property was a small duplex in Georgetown listed at $380,000. I spent 3 days researching everything I could find. Comparable sales, zoning regulations, crime statistics, planned city developments, rental rates for similar properties, property tax assessments, and building permits filed in the neighborhood. When I presented my findings to Ted, I concluded that the property was underpriced by at least $50,000, would generate positive cash flow as a rental, and sat in a neighborhood that was likely to appreciate significantly over the next 5 years due to proximity to the new light rail extension. Ted listened to my presentation, asked several pointed questions, then smiled. You want to buy it? I laughed. With what money? I'm still living paycheck to paycheck. That's not how real estate works, Ted said. Money follows good deals, not the other way around. If the analysis is solid, we can find financing. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
What followed was my introduction to creative financing, partnership structures, and the art of making deals happen without traditional bank loans. Ted knew private lenders who specialized in investment properties. He understood seller financing, lease-to-own arrangements, and partnership deals where expertise and sweat equity could substitute for cash down payments. "I'll put up the down payment," Ted offered. "You'll manage the renovation, handle the tenant screening and rental management, and we'll split the profits 60-40. Consider it your real estate MBA program with real stakes." The duplex needed work: new flooring, updated kitchen, bathroom renovations, and fresh paint throughout. I spent evenings and weekends learning to coordinate contractors, compare bids, and manage renovation timelines. Ted taught me which improvements added value and which were just expensive cosmetic changes. "Granite countertops don't increase rent enough to justify the cost," he explained as we reviewed contractor estimates. "But new appliances and updated bathrooms can add $200 a month to rental income. Always calculate return on investment for every improvement." 3 months later, we'd transformed the duplex into a property that rented for $3,200 monthly, $800 more than comparable units in the area. After covering mortgage payments, insurance, and maintenance reserves, the property generated $1,400 in monthly cash flow.
My share was $560 per month, which represented the first passive income I'd ever earned. More importantly, I'd learned that real estate success wasn't about having money. It was about understanding value, recognizing opportunities, and structuring deals creatively. "This is just the beginning," Ted said, as we deposited the first rent checks. "You've proven you can analyze properties, manage renovations, and create value. Now we scale up." Over the next 18 months, we acquired 4 more properties using variations of the same strategy. I became Ted's full partner, contributing market analysis and project management while he provided experience and capital connections. Each deal taught me something new about financing, negotiation, or property management. The pivotal moment came when Ted announced he was ready to retire. "I'm 62, Sophia. My wife wants to travel, and I've made enough money to be comfortable. But you're just getting started, and frankly, you've gotten better at this business than I ever was." He offered to sell me his share of our partnership properties at a discount, financed through the property's cash flow over 5 years. He also offered to transfer his client relationships and business contacts, essentially handing me a turnkey real estate investment business. "But Ted, I still drive a Honda and live in a 1-bedroom apartment," I protested. "I'm hardly successful enough to take over your business." "Sophia," he said patiently, "you're worth almost $400,000 on paper. You generate $15,000 a month in passive income, and you haven't made a bad investment decision yet. The Honda and the apartment are choices, not limitations." He was right. I'd been so focused on building wealth that I'd never considered actually spending any of it. I lived like I was still unemployed and desperate, saving every penny and reinvesting every profit. Success isn't about displaying wealth. It's about having options. You have more options right now than most people will ever have, whether you choose to exercise them or not. Taking over Ted's business meant stepping out of the shadows and operating as the primary decision maker instead of the junior partner and learning the ropes. It meant taking bigger risks, making larger investments, and trusting my own judgment instead of relying on Ted's experience. It also meant I could finally stop pretending to be struggling and start building something significant. The first major decision I made as the sole owner of Kim Property Solutions, which I renamed Martinez Property Development, was to focus on higher-end properties with greater profit potential. Instead of small duplexes and starter homes, I began targeting commercial buildings, luxury residential properties, and development opportunities. That's when I first learned about the Blackstone estate. The property had been on and off the market for 2 years, with a price that had gradually dropped from $5.2 million to $4.2 million, as sellers struggled to find buyers willing to pay luxury prices in a market that favored practical investments. But I wasn't looking at it as a luxury purchase. I was looking at it as an opportunity to acquire an appreciating asset that would serve as both a personal residence and a long-term investment. The house was perfect, but more importantly,
The deal was perfect. The sellers were motivated, the price was below market value, and I had the cash flow to support the purchase without touching my other investments. 8 months later, I owned the house that Adrian had been fantasizing about, bought for cash with money I'd made by learning that real estate wasn't about finding pretty houses, it was about understanding value. And now, standing in that luxury resort holding the keys while my family stared in disbelief, I realized that Ted's final lesson had been the most important one of all. Sometimes the best part of building wealth quietly is the moment you get to stop being quiet about it.
Taking full control of Martinez property development marked the beginning of what I'd later recognize as the most intense learning period of my life. Without Ted's safety net, every decision carried real consequences, and every mistake would cost me real money. But it also meant every success was entirely mine. My first major independent acquisition was a 4-unit apartment building in Fremont that had been mismanaged by an out-of-state owner for years. The property was structurally sound but cosmetically neglected, with vacancy rates that reflected poor tenant screening and deferred maintenance. The owner was hemorrhaging money and desperate to sell. I offered $680,000 for a building that had been listed at $850,000, contingent on a thorough inspection and 90-day closing period. The seller accepted immediately, which should have been my first warning that the problems were worse than I'd anticipated. What I discovered during the inspection process was a master class in how not to manage rental property. 2 units had been vacant for months due to plumbing issues that had never been properly repaired. The electrical system was outdated and potentially dangerous. The roof needed complete replacement, and the heating system was held together with duct tape and optimism. A traditional buyer would have walked away. I saw an opportunity to add $200,000 in value through systematic improvements. Over the next 4 months, I coordinated a complete building renovation while learning more about contractor management than I'd ever wanted to know. I discovered that getting multiple bids was essential, that the lowest bid was often the most expensive in the long run, and that project timelines were more like suggestions than commitments. But I also learned that tenants appreciated landlords who actually fixed problems, that well-maintained properties could command premium rents, and that attention to detail in renovations paid dividends in reduced maintenance calls and longer tenant retention. When the renovation was complete, I had 4 units renting for a combined $7,200 monthly, compared to the $4,800 the previous owner had been struggling to collect. The building was appraised at $920,000, giving me $240,000 in equity from a $680,000 investment plus $120,000 in renovation costs. More importantly, I'd proven to myself that I could manage complex projects independently and create value through systematic improvements rather than just market timing. That success led to my second major acquisition 6 months later, a small commercial building in Belltown that housed 3 retail businesses on long-term leases. The owner was approaching retirement and preferred a quick sale to someone who would honor the existing lease agreements. Commercial real estate was different from residential in every way that mattered. Lease terms were more complex, tenant relationships were more sophisticated, and the financial analysis required understanding business operations, not just rental markets. I spent weeks learning about triple net leases, common area maintenance charges, and tenant improvement allowances. The building cost $1.4 million, but the existing leases generated $18,000 monthly in rent with built-in annual increases. The tenants were established businesses, a popular coffee shop, a boutique law firm, and a high-end salon, with strong credit histories and lease terms extending 5 to 7 years. What made the deal exceptional was location. The building sat 2 blocks from a light rail station in a neighborhood that was rapidly gentrifying. Similar properties were selling for 30% more just 6 months later. Within a year, I owned properties worth over $2.5 million, generating more than $25,000 monthly in rental income. But more than the numbers, I developed something invaluable, a reputation in Seattle's real estate investment community as someone who could identify undervalued properties and execute complex acquisitions. That reputation led to the opportunity that would change everything.
David Kim from Pacific Northwest Property Development called me on a Thursday afternoon in October, 18 months after I'd taken over the business from Ted. "Sophia, I have something unusual," he said without preamble. David was known for representing high-end properties and sophisticated investors, so his call was unexpected. "There's a property that's been on the market for over a year, and my client is getting frustrated. It's priced right, but it's not moving because it's too expensive for typical buyers and not commercial enough for institutional investors." He was talking about the Blackstone estate. The sellers are a tech executive and his wife who bought at the market peak 3 years ago. They're relocating to Singapore for his job and need to close within 60 days. They've already dropped the price twice, and they're open to creative offers. I drove up to Ridgepoint the next morning and fell in love immediately. The house was everything Adrian would later describe at the family reunion. 6,000 square feet of architectural perfection, with lake views that stretched to the horizon and finishes that belonged in design magazines. But what I saw wasn't just a beautiful house. I saw an asset that was priced below replacement cost, in a location where similar properties had appreciated 15% annually, with sellers who were motivated by timeline rather than price maximization. The financial analysis was compelling. At $4.2 million, the property represented excellent value in a market where comparable lakefront estates were selling for $5.5 to $6 million. The carrying costs would be manageable given my existing cash flow, and the long-term appreciation potential was enormous. More than that, though, I realized I was tired of living like I was still broke. I'd built substantial wealth, but continued living in my modest apartment, driving my old Honda, and dressing like someone who shopped at discount stores. The Blackstone estate represented an opportunity to finally live at the level my success had earned. The negotiation took 3 weeks and required structuring a deal that worked for sellers who needed certainty and speed. I offered $4.0 million cash with a 30-day close, contingent only on inspection and appraisal. The sellers accepted immediately. Buying the house required liquidating some of my other investments and using most of my available cash, but the numbers worked. My rental properties generated enough monthly income to cover the estate's carrying costs, taxes, and maintenance, while my business continued growing. Moving into the Blackstone estate 8 months before the family reunion was surreal. I'd gone from desperate job seeker to luxury homeowner in less than 4 years, but I'd done it so quietly that even my own family had no idea. I kept driving the Honda because it was reliable, and because I enjoyed the disconnect between my modest car and my million-dollar house. I kept shopping at the same stores and wearing the same simple clothes because expensive designer items had never interested me. What I hadn't anticipated was how much my family's assumptions about my failure would begin to bother me. Every family gathering, every casual conversation, every well-meaning suggestion that I needed to get my life together reinforced their perception that I was the Martinez family disappointment. The reunion invitation arriving 6 weeks before the gathering felt like an opportunity to finally set the record straight. Not because I needed their approval, but because I was tired of being misunderstood by people who were supposed to know me best. Planning the reveal became its own kind of project. I could have simply told them about my success, but that felt anticlimactic after years of assumptions. Having the valet return with the keys to the exact property Adrian had been obsessing over felt like poetic justice. As I stood in that luxury resort, watching my family process their shattered assumptions, I realized that building wealth had been the easy part. The hard part was learning to own my success instead of hiding from it. Ted had been right about success creating options. I'd built options I'd never imagined when I was facing eviction 3.5 years earlier. But I was about to learn that success also created challenges I hadn't anticipated, particularly when family members decided that your achievement somehow diminished their own status. The conversation that would follow my revelation would prove that showing them what I'd built was only the beginning of a much more complicated family dynamic.
The silence that followed my casual mention of owning the Blackstone estate stretched for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds. I could see the mental calculations happening behind their eyes. The same people who'd been pitying my cheap car 10 minutes earlier were now trying to reconcile that image with someone who could purchase a $4 million property with cash. Uncle Frank was the first to recover, his business instincts kicking in with the kind of probing questions he probably used when evaluating construction deals. Sophia, when you say you bought it with cash, you mean you got financing pre-approved, right? No one actually purchases properties like that without leveraging. I mean, I wrote a check for $4 million, I interrupted gently. No mortgage, no financing contingencies, 30-day close. The sellers needed certainty and speed, and I was able to provide both. The correction seemed to physically stagger him. Frank had built his construction business over 30 years and was probably worth several $1,000,000 himself, but even he would need significant financing to purchase a property at that level. Aunt Diana's approach was more subtle, but equally revealing. That's wonderful, dear, though I have to ask, and please don't take this the wrong way, but how does someone your age accumulate that kind of liquid capital? I mean, real estate consulting must be more lucrative than we realized. Her tone was carefully modulated, but the implication was clear. There must be some explanation that would allow them to maintain their worldview where success happened through inheritance, luck, or circumstances that weren't available to everyone. Real estate development and investment, I clarified. I've been building a portfolio for the past 4 years. The Blackstone estate was just my most recent acquisition. Kyle leaned forward with the intensity of someone who'd been trying to raise capital for his app startup. A portfolio? Like multiple properties? Residential and commercial. Mostly in Seattle, but I've been expanding into other markets as opportunities arise. The conversations around us had gradually quieted as other family members and resort guests picked up on the dramatic shift in our group's dynamics. I could see my parents approaching from across the room, probably drawn by the unusual silence from their usually chattering family. Adrian had been uncharacteristically quiet since the initial shock, but now he found his voice again. Sophia, this doesn't make sense. 4 years ago, you were working at some financial services company? How do you go from that to owning multiple properties worth millions? It was a fair question, and I could see genuine confusion rather than skepticism in his expression. Adrian might have been condescending about my car, but he wasn't stupid, and he understood enough about wealth building to know that kind of transformation didn't happen through salary savings. I lost my job at Meridian Financial, got laid off when they restructured. I was basically broke and desperate, so I took an administrative job with a real estate investor named Ted Kim. He taught me the business, we became partners, and eventually he sold me his share when he retired. Ted Kim, Frank repeated, his construction industry connections clearly providing some recognition. Korean guy, maybe 60 years old. He's been buying distressed properties in Seattle for decades. That's him. He became my mentor and business partner. Everything I know about real estate I learned from Ted. Mom and Dad had reached our group by then, and I could see them trying to read the room's unusual energy. Mom's social antenna was finely tuned to family dynamics, and she immediately sensed tension. "What's everyone discussing so seriously?" she asked with forced lightness. "Sophia just told us she owns the Blackstone estate," Vanessa said, with her voice carrying a mix of disbelief and something that might have been respect. "The $4.2 million house that Adrian has been obsessing over?" Mom's carefully maintained composure faltered visibly. "Sophia owns what now?" I held up the keys again, letting them catch the light. "The Blackstone estate, on Ridge Point. I bought it 8 months ago." Dad's reaction was different from the others. As an accountant, his mind immediately went to the practical implications. "Honey, that's a significant asset. Are you sure you're comfortable with that level of financial exposure? The property taxes alone must be about $36,000 annually, plus maintenance, insurance, and utilities. It's all covered by rental income from my other properties." The mention of rental income from other properties created another moment of stunned silence.
They'd been trying to process one revelation, and I just casually mentioned that there were multiple revenue-generating properties supporting this lifestyle. Tanner, who I'd barely spoken to in years, suddenly appeared at the edge of our group. He was probably in his mid-30s now, with the kind of aggressive confidence that came from working at a large law firm in San Francisco. Did someone say Sophia owns real estate, like investment properties? Apparently, quite a few of them, Kyle said, still processing the information. Enough to generate rental income that covers a $4 million house. Tanner's lawyer instincts were immediately engaged. That's impressive portfolio diversification. Are you incorporated? LLC structure? The tax implications of that level of real estate ownership can be complex. It was the first conversation any family member had initiated with me that treated me like a successful adult rather than a charity case, and I found myself appreciating his direct, professional approach. Martinez Property Development LLC, I said, with appropriate subsidiary structures for different property types. My attorney and accountant have been very thorough about compliance and tax optimization. Smart, Tanner nodded approvingly. Real estate investment can be incredibly tax-advantaged when structured properly. Aunt Diana was clearly struggling with this new information. I just don't understand how we didn't know about any of this. Sophia, why didn't you ever mention what you were building? We're family. If you'd needed advice or connections. When was the last time anyone asked me about my work beyond polite small talk? When did anyone show genuine interest in what I was doing with my life? The question created an uncomfortable moment of reflection. I could see them mentally reviewing years of family interactions, probably realizing that their interest in my life had never extended much beyond surface-level pleasantries and subtle suggestions that I needed to improve my situation. Jessica, one of my younger cousins who'd been quiet during most of the conversation, spoke up unexpectedly. I think it's amazing. I mean, you built something real while everyone else was just talking about what they wanted to build. Her comment drew sharp looks from some of the older family members, but I appreciated her honesty. She was probably in her late 20s, working in marketing for some tech company, and likely struggling with the same financial pressures I'd faced years earlier. It wasn't easy, I told her. I made a lot of mistakes and learned some expensive lessons, but Ted was a good teacher, and I was motivated to learn. Motivated by what? Adrian asked, and there was genuine curiosity in his voice now, rather than skepticism. By being broke and desperate, I said simply. Nothing motivates you to learn new skills like knowing you're 3 days away from eviction. The honesty seemed to cut through the family's usual tendency toward diplomatic conversation. They were used to success stories that involved steady career progression, family connections, or fortunate circumstances. The idea that someone had built wealth through desperation and determination was outside their usual frame of reference. Frank cleared his throat, clearly struggling to recalibrate his assessment of me. Sophia, I have to say, if you ever want to discuss development opportunities or construction partnerships, I'd be interested in exploring. That's generous, I interrupted politely, but I'm pretty focused on my current growth strategy. Maybe in the future when I'm looking to diversify. It was the kind of response successful business people gave each other, polite but non-real, acknowledging the offer without accepting it. The fact that I was now speaking their language rather than deferring to their expertise marked yet another shift in family dynamics. As the reality of my success continued to sink in, I could see different reactions crystallizing among family members. Some, like Tanner and Jessica, seemed genuinely impressed and interested in understanding what I'd built. Others, like Frank and Diana, appeared to be recalculating their relationship with me based on my new status. But I could also see something else developing behind certain eyes, a kind of calculation that suggested not everyone was happy about their assumptions being shattered. Success within families could be complicated, especially when it disrupted established hierarchies and challenged people's sense of their own relative achievement. The conversation was far from over, and I was beginning to sense that showing them what I'd built might have consequences I hadn't fully considered. After all, some people didn't appreciate being wrong about someone they'd written off. especially when that someone had been quietly succeeding while they'd been openly dismissive.
The rest of the reunion weekend passed with a strange, artificial normalcy that felt like everyone was acting in a play where the script had suddenly changed, but no one wanted to acknowledge it. Conversations continued around the resort's dining areas and lakeside terraces, but there was an undercurrent of whispered discussions and meaningful glances that hadn't been there before my revelation. I noticed family members clustering in small groups, their conversations stopping abruptly when I approached. Adrian spent most of Saturday afternoon on his phone, pacing the resort's grounds with the kind of intense focus that suggested business calls rather than casual conversation. Uncle Frank and Aunt Diana held what looked like a strategic planning session over coffee Sunday morning, their voices too low to overhear, but their body language suggesting serious discussion. The weekend ended with polite goodbyes and promises to stay in touch more often, the kind of family reunion conclusions that usually meant nothing, but felt different this time. As I loaded my overnight bag into the Honda, I caught Adrian watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Drive safe," he said, approaching my car. "And Sophia, congratulations on everything you've built. I know I didn't react well yesterday, but I want you to know I'm genuinely impressed." It seemed sincere, but there was something in his tone that made me wonder if the conversation was being overheard by others. Still, it was more gracious than I'd expected from someone whose dream house I'd casually revealed owning. "Thank you," I said. "Maybe you can come see the house sometime." "I'd like that," he replied, though something in his expression suggested he was thinking about more than just a casual visit. The drive back to Seattle gave me time to process the weekend's events and consider what might come next. I'd achieved what I'd wanted, finally setting the record straight about my success and capabilities, but I was beginning to suspect that revealing my achievements might have created new complications. Those suspicions proved correct when I arrived at my office Monday morning to find 3 voicemail messages that immediately raised red flags. The first was from someone named Marcus Sterling, introducing himself as a senior partner at Sterling & Associates Investment Group. "Ms. Martinez, I've been hearing impressive things about your real estate portfolio, and I'd love to discuss some potential partnership opportunities. We specialize in helping successful independent developers expand their operations through strategic capital injection and operational expertise." The second message was from Jennifer Walsh at Pacific Coast Property Management. "Sophia, I hope you don't mind the cold call, but several people have mentioned your name as someone who might be interested in our premium property management services. We handle everything from tenant relations to maintenance coordination, allowing owners to focus on acquisition and development, rather than day-to-day operations." The third call was the most concerning. Rachel Webb from Northwestern Business Analytics had left a detailed message about comprehensive market analysis services for growing real estate portfolios. She claimed to offer competitive intelligence, market trend analysis, and strategic planning support for sophisticated investors looking to optimize their acquisition strategies. 3 unsolicited business development calls in one morning would have been unusual under any circumstances. 3 calls that arrived the Monday after a family reunion where I'd revealed my real estate success felt too coincidental to ignore. I called David Kim, my real estate attorney, and described the messages. David had been handling high-end property transactions for 15 years and understood the industry's networks and communication patterns better than anyone I knew. "Sophia, that's not normal," he said after I'd finished describing the calls. "Legitimate investment groups don't typically cold call independent developers based on weekend gossip, and property management companies don't pursue clients they haven't been referred to by existing contacts. So, what do you think is happening? Someone's fishing for information about your business. The question is why and who's asking them to do it." That afternoon brought confirmation that something was indeed happening. Nina Rodriguez, my office manager, knocked on my door with a concerned expression.
Sophia, I just got off the phone with someone from Seattle Business Weekly who claimed to be doing a story about successful women and real estate development. She asked really specific questions about our business structure, your property portfolio, and our financing relationships. What kind of specific questions?
She wanted to know how long you'd been operating independently, whether you had business partners, what your annual transaction volume was, and whether you worked with private lenders or traditional bank financing. Nina paused. But here's the weird part. She already knew details about some of our properties. She mentioned the Ballard duplex and the Fremont apartment building by address. The pattern was becoming clear. Someone was conducting research on my business using multiple approaches, trying to gather comprehensive information about my operations, financing, and vulnerabilities. Wednesday brought the most direct approach yet. A man named Jonathan Pierce called my office directly, introducing himself as a senior acquisition specialist with Northwest Development Partners. Ms. Martinez, I'll be direct, he said in a smooth, professional voice. We've been following your work in the Seattle market, and we're impressed by what you've accomplished. We're interested in discussing acquisition opportunities that could provide immediate liquidity while allowing you to participate in larger-scale development projects. What kind of acquisition opportunities? I asked, though I suspected I already knew where this was heading. We're prepared to make a substantial cash offer for your entire portfolio, residential and commercial properties. This would allow you to diversify your holdings while partnering with an organization that has the capital and expertise to scale operations significantly. It was a buyout offer disguised as a partnership opportunity, exactly what David had predicted someone might attempt. That's an interesting proposition, I said carefully. Can you tell me how you learned about my properties? There was a brief pause. Word gets around in the industry when someone's doing quality work. Your reputation for successful acquisitions and value creation has gotten attention from people who understand the business. Which people specifically? Another pause, longer this time. I'm not at liberty to discuss our information sources, but I can assure you that our interest is based on publicly available transaction records and professional references from people who've worked with you. The lie was smooth, but obvious. My transactions had been deliberately structured to maintain privacy, and I'd worked with a limited circle of professionals who wouldn't share client information without permission. I appreciate the interest, I told Pierce, but I'm not looking to sell any of my properties at this time. I understand, though I should mention that market conditions can change quickly in real estate. Having the right partners positioned to help during challenging periods can be invaluable. The subtle threat wasn't lost on me. This wasn't just an acquisition offer, it was the beginning of a pressure campaign designed to make me feel like selling was my best option. After Pierce hung up, I spent an hour making phone calls to my professional network, trying to understand how information about my business was circulating and who might be driving the sudden interest in my properties. The picture that emerged was troubling. Tom Harrison, my insurance broker, mentioned that someone had called asking about coverage levels on my properties. Lisa Chen, my commercial real estate agent, had received inquiries about whether I was looking to sell any buildings. Even my accountant had gotten a call from someone claiming to be conducting a survey about real estate investment trends, with questions that focused specifically on my business structure. Someone was conducting comprehensive research on my operations, using multiple approaches to gather information that could be used to pressure me into selling or to identify vulnerabilities in my business model. By Thursday afternoon, I had enough puces to see the pattern clearly. The timing, the coordination, and the specific focus on my business all pointed to someone with inside knowledge of my family's weekend revelation. The question was which family member had decided that Sophia's unexpected success was a problem that needed to be solved, and how far they were willing to go to solve it. I was about to discover that family loyalty had limits, especially when success disrupted established hierarchies and challenged people's sense of their own relative importance. The war for control of everything I had built was just beginning, and it was being waged by people who were supposed to care about my well-being more than anyone else in the world.
The coordinated nature of the attacks on my business became undeniable when I received a certified letter Friday afternoon that made the stakes crystal clear.
The letter came from Castellano and Associates Legal Services, Uncle Frank's business attorney, and was signed by someone named Victoria Castellano, who I assumed was either Frank's daughter-in-law or a partner in the firm. The letter was carefully worded legal language disguised as helpful advice, but the message was unmistakable. Recent industry discussions have raised questions about the compliance status of certain independent real estate developers in the Seattle market. Given the complex regulatory environment surrounding property acquisition, financing disclosure, and tenant relations, we wanted to reach out regarding potential legal consultation services that might help ensure your operations remain in full compliance with current statutes. It was a masterpiece of legal intimidation. The letter didn't accuse me of any specific violations, but it planted the suggestion that my business might be operating in legally questionable ways. More importantly, it demonstrated that Uncle Frank was now directly involved in whatever campaign was being waged against me. I immediately called David Kim and read him the letter over the phone. "Sophia, this crosses a line," David said, his voice tight with professional anger. "This is harassment disguised as business development. No legitimate law firm sends unsolicited letters suggesting potential compliance issues without specific cause or prior relationship. Can we do anything about it legally? We can document it as part of a harassment pattern, but more importantly, this tells us that whoever's behind this has escalated to direct intimidation tactics. That suggests they're either getting desperate or they're preparing for more aggressive moves." David's prediction proved accurate when Nina called me at home Saturday morning with panic in her voice. "Sophia, there's a problem with the Fremont building. Mrs. Patterson in Unit 3 called me an hour ago saying someone from the city was there yesterday asking questions about occupancy permits and rental compliance. Then Mr. Williams from Unit 1 called to say he'd been contacted by someone claiming to be from a tenant rights organization, asking about his lease terms and whether he'd experienced any maintenance issues." My stomach dropped. Someone's trying to create problems with our tenants. It gets worse. I just checked our business email, and we've received formal complaints filed with the city's rental housing department. 3 separate complaints about the Fremont building, all filed yesterday, all claiming various code violations and maintenance issues. I drove to the Fremont building immediately and spent 2 hours walking through every unit with my maintenance supervisor, Carlos Torres. Carlos had been managing the property for 18 months and knew every inch of the building. "Sophia, these complaints are bullshit," he said bluntly as we finished inspecting the final unit. "They're claiming electrical hazards that don't exist, plumbing problems that were fixed months ago, and heating issues that were resolved during the renovation. Someone filed these complaints without ever setting foot in the building." But fake or not, the complaints would trigger official inspections, potential fines, and administrative headaches that could disrupt our operations and create legal vulnerabilities. Even worse, the complaints would become public record, potentially affecting the property's value and my reputation as a responsible landlord. I spent Saturday afternoon making phone calls to understand the full scope of what was happening. What I discovered was a coordinated campaign that was more sophisticated than I had initially realized. My property management company had received calls about my other buildings. My insurance company had been contacted by someone claiming to represent tenants who were considering filing claims. Even my bank had gotten an inquiry from someone asking about my commercial loan portfolio and payment history. Someone wasn't just trying to buy my properties, they were trying to systematically undermine my business's stability and reputation to force a distressed sale. Sunday morning brought the most direct confrontation yet. Adrian called my personal phone, his voice carrying a false casualness that immediately put me on alert. "Hey, Sophia, I was just thinking about our conversation at the reunion. You mentioned you might be interested in diversifying some of your real estate holdings. I've been talking to some people, and there might be some interesting opportunities to explore." "What kind of opportunities?" "Well, you know how volatile the real estate market can be. Interest rates, regulatory changes, maintenance costs, it can all add up quickly. But there are ways to convert real estate equity into more liquid investments that might be less risky long-term."
It was exactly the kind of approach Jonathan Pierce had used, suggesting that my current success was somehow precarious and that selling was a smart strategic move rather than capitulation to pressure. "Adrian, are you involved with the people who've been calling my office this week?"
There was a pause that lasted just long enough to confirm my suspicions. I'm not sure what you mean, but if you're getting calls from investors, that's probably a good sign. It means people recognize the value in what you've built. It means someone's been sharing information about my business that should be private. Sophia, we're family. If there are opportunities that could benefit you, don't you think families should be looking out for each other? The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, with Adrian making increasingly direct suggestions that I should consider selling some properties while the market was strong. He mentioned specific details about my portfolio, the Fremont building, the commercial property in Belltown, even accurate estimates of my monthly rental income. Information he couldn't have known unless someone had been systematically researching my business and sharing the results with him. After Adrian hung up, I made a decision that would define how this conflict played out. Instead of reacting defensively to their attacks, I was going to gather evidence of the harassment campaign and then use that evidence to shut down their operation permanently. I called David Kim and asked him to recommend a private investigator who specialized in business harassment cases. Then I contacted my IT consultant and asked him to set up monitoring systems for all my business communications and digital presence. If my own family wanted to wage war against the business I'd built, they were about to discover that I'd learned more than just real estate investing over the past 4 years. I'd learned how to fight strategically, how to document evidence methodically, and how to respond to threats with overwhelming force rather than defensive measures. Monday morning, I met with Sarah Chen, the private investigator David had recommended. Sarah was a former FBI agent who now specialized in corporate investigations, and she understood immediately what kind of evidence we'd need to document the harassment campaign. What we're looking for is proof of coordination, she explained as we reviewed the timeline of calls and letters I'd received. Phone records, email communications, financial connections between the people contacting you and your family members. Once we can prove this is an organized effort rather than coincidental interest, we can pursue legal remedies. How long will that take? 2 weeks, maybe 3? But Sophia, you should be prepared for this to escalate before we have enough evidence to stop it. People who are willing to file false complaints and coordinate harassment campaigns usually don't stop until they're forced to stop. Sarah was right. Tuesday brought news that someone had contacted my largest commercial tenant, suggesting they might want to explore more stable rental arrangements with other property owners. Wednesday, I received a letter from an attorney representing concerned neighbors of my Ballard property, claiming that rental operations were affecting neighborhood property values. By Thursday, it was clear that whoever was behind this campaign was prepared to attack every aspect of my business simultaneously: tenants, neighbors, city regulators, and professional relationships. But they'd made one critical mistake. They'd underestimated how thoroughly I documented everything and how quickly I could mobilize professional help when threatened. The evidence Sarah was gathering would soon reveal not just who was behind the harassment campaign, but the full scope of their plan to destroy my business and force me to sell my properties at distressed prices. What they hadn't calculated was that the quiet woman who'd built a real estate empire while driving a Honda and wearing discount clothes was also someone who had learned to fight battles with the same strategic patience she'd used to build wealth. The war they'd started was about to turn in my favor, and the consequences for the people who attacked me would be far more severe than they had imagined.
3 weeks after I'd hired Sarah Chen, she called me with the kind of news that made my pulse quicken with anticipation rather than anxiety. "Sophia, we've got them," she said without preamble. "Phone records, email communications, financial connections, the whole conspiracy laid out in black and white. Are you ready to see how deep this goes?" We met that afternoon at David Kim's law office, where Sarah spread out a comprehensive investigation report that revealed the full scope of my family's betrayal. The evidence was more damning than I'd expected. "It starts with your brother," Sarah explained, pointing to phone records. Adrian called Uncle Frank the Monday after the reunion, a 43-minute conversation. Within 2 hours, Frank was calling Jonathan Pierce at Northwest Development Partners. She showed me the connection I'd suspected but hadn't been able to prove. Northwest Development Partners was a subsidiary of Castellano Holdings, which was controlled by Frank's construction company.
Jonathan Pierce wasn't an independent investor. He was Frank's employee, following Frank's instructions to pressure me into selling. But it gets more interesting, Sarah continued, flipping to the next section. Pierce wasn't just trying to buy your properties. Look at these documents. She handed me a folder containing property development plans that made my blood run cold. Frank had already secured zoning approvals and construction permits for a luxury residential complex that could only be built if my Fremont apartment building was demolished. The plans were dated 2 weeks after the reunion, meaning he'd started the approval process before even attempting to buy my property. He was planning to tear down my building regardless of whether I agreed to sell? Exactly. And look at the financing structure for his development project. The loan documents showed that Frank had used the projected acquisition of my properties as collateral for a $12 million construction loan. He'd essentially borrowed money based on the assumption that he could force me to sell, and if I didn't cooperate, he'd be facing default on a massive loan. David Kim studied the documents with the focused intensity of someone who'd spent decades handling complex legal cases. This is conspiracy to commit fraud, he said finally. Frank used false projections about acquiring my properties to secure financing. That's bank fraud at minimum. Sarah wasn't finished. There's more. Adrian didn't just provide information, he actively participated in the harassment campaign. She showed me email exchanges between Adrian and various people who'd been contacting my business. Adrian had provided them with tenant contact information, property addresses, and detailed financial information about my operations. He'd even suggested specific complaints to file with city regulators. Your brother sold you out completely, Sarah said bluntly. He gave them everything they needed to attack your business systematically. The betrayal cut deeper than I'd expected. I knew Adrian was involved, but seeing the extent of his cooperation with Frank's scheme felt like a physical blow. But Sarah had saved the most shocking revelation for last. The person coordinating all of this wasn't Frank, she said, sliding a final folder across the table. Look at these phone records carefully. The evidence showed that while Frank was handling the financial and legal aspects of the scheme, the operational coordination was being managed by someone else entirely. Aunt Diana. Diana had been calling my professional contacts, gathering information about my business relationships, and coordinating the timing of various harassment tactics. She'd used her reputation and social connections to legitimize what amounts to organized harassment. The scope of the conspiracy was breathtaking. Frank, Diana, and Adrian had created a coordinated attack designed to destroy my business, force me into financial distress, and acquire my properties at below-market prices, all while using family relationships to gather inside information about my vulnerabilities. But they'd made one critical error. They documented everything in writing and over recorded phone lines. David Kim leaned back in his chair, studying the evidence with satisfaction. This is enough to file criminal charges for conspiracy, fraud, and harassment. It's also grounds for civil suits that could cost them everything they own. I looked at the folders full of evidence, proof that members of my own family had tried to destroy everything I'd built. The betrayal was complete, but so was my ability to respond to it. What are our options?
We can file criminal charges, pursue civil litigation, or use this evidence to force them to cease their activities and make restitution, David said. But Sophia, given that these are family members, you might want to consider giving them an opportunity to surrender before we bring in law enforcement. It was a generous suggestion, but I'd learned something important about myself over the past few weeks. I wasn't interested in being generous with people who'd tried to destroy me. Set up a meeting, I decided. I want to confront them directly with this evidence and give them exactly one opportunity to explain themselves before we file charges. The meeting was arranged for the following Friday at David Kim's office. Frank, Diana, and Adrian were told only that there were urgent legal matters related to my business that required their immediate attention. They had no idea that we'd uncovered their entire conspiracy.
When they walked into the conference room that Friday afternoon, I was sitting at the head of the table with David, Sarah, and 3 folders of evidence laid out in front of me. The expression on Frank's face when he saw Sarah was priceless, the immediate recognition that a private investigator's presence meant his scheme had been discovered. "Thank you all for coming," I said calmly. "I wanted to discuss the coordinated campaign you've been waging against my business for the past month." Diana attempted damage control immediately. "Sophia, I don't know what you think. I think you've been using your social connections to file false complaints about my properties, while Frank used his business relationships to pressure my professional contacts, and Adrian provided inside information about my operations to facilitate harassment." I interrupted, opening the first folder. "But I don't have to think anything, because I have proof." I began laying out the evidence systematically: phone records, emails, financial documents, recordings of conversations where they'd discuss strategy. With each document, I watched their faces progress through denial, anger, and finally, the pale recognition that they'd been caught completely. Adrian was the first to break. "Sophia, we just thought, you're so young and managing that much real estate can be risky. We were trying to help you diversify." "You were trying to help Frank secure financing for his development project by forcing me to sell my properties below market value," I corrected. "And when I wouldn't cooperate voluntarily, you decided to destroy my business to pressure me into compliance." Frank had been uncharacteristically quiet, but now he found his voice. "This is all a misunderstanding. Family business discussions, nothing more." I slid the loan documents across the table. "These are the construction loan papers where you used my properties as projected collateral without my knowledge or consent. That's fraud, Frank. Federal fraud." The silence that followed was profound. They'd walked into the meeting expecting to manage whatever concerns I might have raised. Instead, they were facing evidence of criminal conspiracy and the realization that their attempt to destroy me had been thoroughly documented. David Kim spoke for the first time. "You have 2 options. You can cooperate with our investigation, make full restitution for damages to Sophia's business, and agree to cease all harassment activities immediately. Or we can file criminal charges this afternoon and let federal prosecutors sort out the fraud allegations." Diana looked like she might faint. Adrian stared at the table as if it hoped it would swallow him. Frank, to his credit, seems to understand exactly how completely they'd been outmaneuvered. "What kind of restitution are we talking about?" Frank asked quietly. "Full compensation for business damages, legal fees, investigation costs, and punitive damages for the emotional distress and professional harm you've caused," David replied. "We estimate the total at approximately $750,000. It was enough money to cripple Frank's construction business and force the sale of significant assets. More importantly, it was enough to ensure they'd never again have the resources to mount this kind of attack against anyone. The people who tried to destroy everything I'd built were about to learn that underestimating quiet, determined people was the most expensive mistake they could make."
The settlement negotiations took 2 weeks, during which Frank, Diana, and Adrian learned exactly how expensive their conspiracy had been, not just financially, but in terms of family relationships and personal reputations. Frank's construction business was forced into a fire sale to cover the $750,000 restitution. His luxury SUV, the vacation home in Whistler, and most of his equipment were liquidated to pay what David Kim diplomatically called damages for attempted business destruction. The irony wasn't lost on any of us that Frank, who'd built his identity around material success, was being stripped of those very symbols to compensate me for trying to destroy what I'd built. Diana faced different but equally severe consequences. Her involvement in the harassment campaign became public record when we filed the civil complaint, and her reputation in Seattle social circles was destroyed overnight. The volunteer organizations she'd used to coordinate attacks on my business expelled her, and several longtime friends publicly distanced themselves from her actions. For someone whose identity was built around social status and community respect, the fall was devastating.
Adrian's consequences were more personal, but no less significant. Beyond his financial contribution to the restitution, which required him to sell his Porsche and liquidate his investment portfolio, he faced the reality that his betrayal had permanently damaged our relationship. The brother who'd shared childhood adventures and family holidays had sold out my business interests for a share in Uncle Frank's development profits. But the most unexpected part of the resolution came from family members who hadn't been involved in the conspiracy. My parents, who'd learned about the scheme only after the settlement was finalized, were horrified by what Frank and Diana had orchestrated. Mom called me 3 days after the news broke, her voice shaking with emotion. "Sophia, I had no idea what they were planning," she said. "If I'd known that my own brother-in-law was trying to destroy what you'd built, I'm so sorry. We didn't know what was happening to you." Dad's response was more direct, but equally genuine. "Honey, what they did was unconscionable. Using family information to attack your business? That's not family. That's a criminal conspiracy." For the first time in years, my parents were seeing me as someone who'd been wronged, rather than someone who needed their guidance or concern. Tanner surprised me by calling personally to apologize for his family's actions and to offer his legal services if I needed ongoing support with the settlement enforcement. "What my parents did was indefensible," he said bluntly, "and I want you to know that not everyone in this family supported their decisions." Even more surprising was Jessica, my younger cousin, who asked if we could meet for coffee to discuss what had happened. "I've been thinking about our conversation at the reunion," she said as we sat in a small cafe in Capitol Hill, "about being scared when building something new. What you went through these past few weeks, having your own family try to tear down what you'd built, that's terrifying. But you fought back and won. It wasn't really about winning, it was about protecting what I'd worked for and making sure they couldn't do it to anyone else. That's what I mean, though. You didn't just defend yourself. You documented everything, built a case, and responded strategically instead of emotionally. That's the kind of business thinking I need to learn." Jessica's marketing company was struggling, and she'd been considering whether to give up on entrepreneurship entirely. Our conversation led to her asking if I'd consider mentoring her through the process of building a sustainable business. Not in real estate, but using the strategic thinking and systematic approach I'd learned from Ted Kim. "I can't teach you real estate in 6 months," I told her, "but I can teach you how to analyze opportunities, build professional relationships, and respond to challenges without panicking." It became the beginning of a mentoring relationship that reminded me why I'd gotten into business in the first place, not just to build wealth, but to create opportunities and help others build something meaningful. 6 months after the confrontation, I received an unexpected letter from Adrian. Not an email or a phone call, but an actual handwritten letter delivered to my office. "Sophia," it began, "I've spent the past 6 months trying to figure out how to apologize for what I did, and I keep coming back to the same conclusion. There's no apology adequate for betraying family the way I betrayed you. But I want you to know that I understand now what I threw away, and I'm not asking for forgiveness because I don't deserve it. I'm asking for the chance to prove that I can become someone worthy of being your brother again." The letter went on to explain that Adrian had taken a job with a nonprofit organization that helped small businesses recover from harassment and predatory practices, essentially doing the kind of work that could have helped me if I'd needed it. He wasn't making much money, but he was learning skills that actually helped people instead of just generating profits. "I know I can't undo what I did," the letter concluded, "but I can make sure I spend the rest of my career helping people like you instead of helping people like Frank." I didn't respond to the letter immediately. Part of me appreciated the gesture, but forgiveness wasn't something I was ready to offer just because someone had finally understood the consequences of their actions. But 3 months later, when Jessica mentioned that her business was being harassed by a predatory competitor trying to steal her clients, I found myself calling Adrian. "I need someone who understands harassment tactics," I told him. "Someone who can help document what's happening and coordinate with attorneys to stop it." Adrian's voice was quiet when he responded. "I'll help however I can. No charge, no expectations. Just let me do something useful for family instead of destructive." The case took 2 months to resolve, but Adrian's work was thorough and professional. More importantly, he'd learned to use his understanding of predatory business practices to protect people instead of enabling them. As I sat in my home office at the Blackstone estate one evening, reviewing the year's financial reports, I realized that the family reunion confrontation had ultimately led to something I hadn't expected: clarity about what success actually meant. The numbers were impressive. My real estate portfolio had grown to over $8 million in value, generating monthly income that most people would consider a successful annual salary. But the real success wasn't the money or the properties. The real success was that I'd built something that could survive coordinated attacks from people who knew me best. I'd learned to fight strategically when threatened, to document everything methodically, and to respond to betrayal with overwhelming professional force rather than emotional reaction. More importantly, I'd learned that family wasn't defined by blood relationships, but by the people who supported your growth instead of trying to tear down your achievements. Ted Kim called that evening to check on how the mentoring relationship with Jessica was developing. "He reminds me of you when you first started," he said. "Scared but determined, willing to learn but not willing to quit." "It's satisfying to pass on what you taught me," I told him. "That's the real point of building wealth," Ted replied. "Not the having it, but the using it to create more opportunities for other people to build something meaningful." As I hung up the phone and looked out at the lake view that had once represented Adrian's impossible dream, I understood that the most important lesson from the entire experience wasn't about real estate or family dynamics or strategic thinking. It was about the difference between building something that could be taken away and building something that created value for others. The first was just accumulation. The second was legacy. The quiet woman who drove a Honda to that family reunion had been building both, but it had taken a family war to understand which one mattered more.
Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.